You can't shout fire in a crowded theater. You have heard that line your whole life. It gets used to end arguments. Proof that free speech has limits, that some words simply aren't protected. There is just one problem. That is not what the Supreme Court said. It isn't the law today. And the case those words come from is one where the government jailed a man for handing out anti-draft pamphlets. This may be the most misquoted sentence in American law. This is the story of Schenck versus United States, where that famous line actually came from, what it really said, and why almost everyone who quotes it is quoting a standard the Supreme Court abandoned half a century ago. One note before we begin. This is legal history and education, not legal advice. Start with how powerful that phrase has become. Someone says something offensive or dangerous or unpopular, and out it comes. Well, you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. Conversation over. It sounds like settled law. It sounds like something carved into the Constitution. It is neither. To see why, we have to go back to 1917. The United States had entered the First World War. To fill the Army, Congress created a draft, compulsory military service. And to protect the war effort, it passed the Espionage Act of 1917, which made it a crime to cause insubordination in the armed forces or to obstruct military recruiting and enlistment. That law is the key to everything that follows. In Philadelphia, a man named Charles Schenck was the General Secretary of the Socialist Party. The party's executive committee passed a resolution: print 15,000 leaflets and mail them to men who had already been called up and accepted for military service. Schenck personally handled the printing. So what did this leaflet actually say? One side quoted the 13th Amendment, the ban on involuntary servitude, and argued that the draft violated it. It said a conscripted man was little better than a convict. It called conscription despotism in its worst form. The other side was headed, "Assert your rights." And here is the detail that matters most. For all its heated language, the leaflet urged peaceful, lawful action. It told readers not to submit to intimidation and pointed them toward petitioning Congress to repeal the draft. It did not call for violence. It did not call for sabotage. It asked people to speak up and to petition their government. It didn't matter. Schenck was arrested, charged under the Espionage Act with conspiring to obstruct recruiting, and convicted on every count. He appealed, raising the most basic defense imaginable: the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. He had printed words on paper and put them in the mail. The case reached the Supreme Court in 1919, and the justice who would write the opinion was the most celebrated judge in America, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., a Civil War veteran, a legendary legal mind, a man whose sentences are still quoted a century later. He was about to write one of them. The court's decision was unanimous. Schenck's conviction was upheld. Every single justice agreed that the First Amendment did not protect him. And in explaining why, Holmes reached for an example, an image so vivid that it would outlive the case, outlive the doctrine, and outlive its own accuracy. His reasoning ran like this: the character of every act, he wrote, depends on the circumstances in which it is done. Words that would be perfectly lawful in peacetime might not be when a nation is at war. And then, to illustrate that speech isn't absolute, he offered the sentence that would take on a life of its own. Here is exactly what Holmes wrote: the most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic. Read it slowly, because in that one sentence are two words that almost everyone drops, and their absence changes the meaning completely. The first is falsely. Holmes was not talking about an unpopular opinion. He was describing a lie, deliberately raising a false alarm to trigger a stampede. That is not speech in any meaningful sense. It is closer to pulling a fire alarm. When people drop that word, they turn a narrow example about deception into a blanket excuse for silencing views they dislike. The second word is the one that isn't there at all. Holmes never wrote crowded, he wrote a theater. The word everybody adds, the word that makes the image feel so urgent, so packed with imminent danger, was never in the opinion. The most quoted line in American free speech debate is not even a quotation. It's a paraphrase that people have been improving for 100 years. But the deepest problem is bigger than the wording. That sentence was not the court's ruling. In law, there is a crucial distinction. The holding is the actual legal decision binding on future courts. Dictum is everything else. The astalls, the illustrations, the colorful reasoning along the way. The theater line is dictum. It decided nothing. It bound no one. It was an analogy. So what did the case actually hold? The question in every case is whether the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger that they will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. That is the real legacy, the clear and present danger test. Holmes added that it is a question of proximity and degree. And notice what that test permitted in practice. It was flexible, and in wartime it bent hard toward the government. Within weeks, the court used the same reasoning to uphold more convictions of wartime dissenters, including most famously Eugene Debs, a former presidential candidate imprisoned over a speech. A test meant to identify a genuine danger was, in its first season, mostly a tool for punishing unpopular opinion. Then something remarkable happened. Holmes himself began to change his mind. That very same year, in a case called Abrams, the court upheld yet another Espionage Act conviction. And this time Holmes dissented, joined by Justice Brandeis. He argued that the ultimate good is better reached by the free trade in ideas, and insisted the danger must be truly imminent before speech can be punished. The author of the test was already pulling against it, but the phrase had escaped. Over the following decades, clear and present danger was stretched, reshaped, and at times watered down almost to nothing, most notoriously during the Cold War, when it was used to uphold convictions of Communist Party leaders. A standard that was supposed to protect speech kept proving elastic whenever the government felt threatened. And then, in 1969, the Supreme Court effectively ended it. In Brandenburg versus Ohio, the court replaced the old approach with a far more protective rule. The government may not punish advocacy, even advocacy of force or law-breaking, unless that speech is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action, and is likely to incite or produce such action. Look at how much harder that is to satisfy. Under Brandenburg, it isn't enough that words are dangerous, or hateful, or that they might inspire someone someday. The speech must aim at immediate lawless action and be likely to actually cause it. Under that rule, Charles Schenck, mailing pamphlets urging people to petition Congress, would almost certainly walk free today. So here is where the law truly stands. The controlling test is Brandenburg, not Schenck. Advocacy of ideas, including ideas most people find repugnant, is protected. The genuine exceptions to the First Amendment are narrow and specifically defined. Things like true threats, defamation, and incitement as Brandenburg defines it. Anything I think is dangerous is not on that list. Then why does the myth survive? Because it is vivid, intuitive, and enormously convenient. It gives anyone who wants to shut down speech a sentence that sounds like constitutional authority. But whoever reaches for it is invoking a misquotation of a non-binding aside from a decision that sent a man to prison for handing out leaflets under a standard the court replaced 50 years ago. And that reveals something this whole series keeps circling. We watch students win the right to wear a black armband in Tinker. Here we watch a man lose his freedom over a pamphlet, and then watch the court, slowly and imperfectly, correct itself. The Constitution is not a fixed set of answers handed down once. It is an argument the country keeps having, and sometimes the country changes its mind. So the next time someone ends a debate with, "You can't shout fire in a crowded theater," you will know 4 things they don't. Holmes never said crowded. He did say falsely, and it mattered. It wasn't the court's ruling, it was an illustration. And the legal test it came wrapped in was replaced in 1969 by a rule that protects far more speech, not less. The line survives because it sounds like law. Knowing where it actually came from is how you stop being ruled by a sentence nobody quotes correctly. If that's the kind of thing you want to understand more deeply, consider subscribing. We take one landmark case at a time, and we try to get it right. Thank you for watching. And remember, this video is for education and history. It is not legal advice.